Late in 1942, the Allied push into Axis-held territory was gaining speed. In Sicily, a war-torn city lay in ruins after weeks of bombing and shelling. The narrow streets were filled with rubble, broken carts, and the remains of old stone buildings. Smoke drifted through the air, carrying the smell of burnt wood and cordite. It was here that U.S. infantry units, new to the European theater, met German defenders in brutal house-to-house combat. The Americans moved cautiously through the streets. They had crossed the Atlantic only weeks before and were still adjusting to the harsh realities of European urban warfare. Their weapons were clean and heavy in their hands. Among them were several men carrying the Thompson submachine gun. It was a weapon many had trained with back home but had never fired in combat. The Thompson was unlike anything the Germans were used to facing. The Germans held the upper floors of key buildings along a central street that cut through the heart of the city. They were well dug in, with sandbags and machine gun nests covering every intersection. Most German riflemen carried the Kar 98K, a bolt-action rifle with a slow rate of fire. A few squads had MP-40 submachine guns, but they were in short supply. The Germans relied on precision and discipline to hold their positions. They expected the same from their enemy. As dawn broke, an American squad moved into position at the edge of a narrow alley. Their orders were simple: take the street, clear the buildings, and secure the crossroads. A heavy German machine gun, an MG-42, had been cutting down anyone who dared to cross the open ground. The squad leader, Sergeant Miller, studied the layout. He pointed to two men armed with Thompsons. They would flank through a side alley while the rest laid down fire with rifles and a Browning automatic rifle. The fight began with a single shot. A German rifleman fired from an upper window. The Americans dropped to the ground, returning fire immediately. The MG-42 opened up, its high-pitched roar echoing between the buildings. Bullets struck the stone walls, sending chips of rock into the air. The Americans hugged the ground, pinned down and unable to move forward. Miller shouted over the noise, signaling his men to hold. The two Thompson gunners slipped into the side alley, moving quickly and staying low. The Thompsons were heavy, almost 10 pounds each, but the men knew their value in close quarters. With 30-round stick magazines and a blistering rate of fire, they could deliver overwhelming bursts of firepower at short range. They reached a wooden door at the side of the building. One man kicked it open. Inside, the rooms were dark and filled with overturned furniture. A German soldier appeared in the hallway, raising his rifle. The Thompson fired first, a short burst that dropped him instantly. The sound of the weapon was deep and steady, unlike the sharp crack of a rifle. In the tight space, it was deafening. The two men moved from room to room, clearing each one with controlled bursts. They reloaded quickly, slamming fresh magazines into place. Upstairs, a group of Germans prepared to defend their position. They were used to fighting opponents armed mostly with rifles. The sudden flood of automatic fire shocked them. A burst from a Thompson tore through the doorway, forcing them to dive for cover. Several were cut down before they could respond. Meanwhile, outside on the street, the rest of the squad pressed forward. With the MG-42 distracted by the chaos inside, Miller led his men across the open ground. They threw grenades into windows and advanced under covering fire. When they reached the base of the fortified building, the Thompsons were still firing upstairs. The rapid rhythm of the guns gave the Americans confidence. It was the sound of progress, of an enemy being pushed back. Inside, the fighting was short and violent. German defenders tried to regroup, but the close quarters favored the Americans. The heavy .45 caliber rounds from the Thompsons hit with devastating force. Doors splintered, walls shook. When the last burst ended, the upper floor was silent except for the moans of the wounded. The Americans gathered in the cleared room, breathing hard. Their uniforms were torn, and their faces were streaked with dirt and sweat. The two Thompson gunners swapped out empty magazines for full ones, ready for the next fight. Miller gave a quick nod. They had secured the building, and the street was now in American hands. German prisoners were led outside. Their expressions were a mix of anger and disbelief. Many had never faced so much automatic fire at such close range. They muttered about the American meat grinder, a grim nickname for the Thompson. One German officer examined a captured weapon with a look of concern. He understood the threat it posed. As word of the encounter spread, both sides took note. For the Americans, the Thompson proved its worth in urban combat. For the Germans, it was a warning. Their bolt-action rifles and limited number of MP-40s were no match for a squad equipped with multiple submachine guns. The need for more automatic weapons became clear. The street was quiet by evening. Civilians emerged from hiding, moving carefully among the wreckage. The smell of gunpowder lingered. Spent casings littered the ground, a stark reminder of the day's battle. Among them lay the distinctive curved magazines of the Thompson. It had changed the rhythm of the fight and set the tone for the brutal days to come. The Thompson submachine gun was one of the most distinctive weapons carried by American troops in the Second World War. It was designed for close-quarters fighting and had already seen use by law enforcement and criminals during the gang wars of the 1920s and 1930s. By 1942, it had become a standard weapon for many U.S. infantry units, especially squad leaders, paratroopers, and assault teams tasked with clearing enemy strongpoints. The Thompson fired the .45 ACP cartridge, a heavy round that packed a strong punch at short ranges. In a close fight, it could stop an enemy soldier with a single hit. The weapon's rate of fire was between 600 and 700 rounds per minute. This gave American soldiers the ability to unleash a steady stream of bullets in confined spaces such as alleys, stairwells, and small rooms. Its effective range was only about 50 to 100 yards, far less than a rifle, but in city streets and inside buildings, that distance was more than enough. There were two main magazine types for the Thompson. The stick magazine came in 20 and 30-round versions. It was easier to reload under stress and more reliable in combat. The other option was the 50-round drum magazine, which offered more firepower but added weight and bulk. The gun itself weighed about 10 pounds, making it heavier than a rifle. Soldiers carrying the Thompson often felt its weight on long marches, but when the fighting moved into close quarters, that weight was worth it. The Thompson's construction was solid. It had a wooden stock and grip with metal components built to last. Early versions were finely machined and expensive to produce, but wartime demand forced manufacturers to simplify the design. By late 1942, production was focused on speed and efficiency. The simplified M1 and M1A1 models replaced the earlier, more complex 1928 variant. These newer models were rugged and easier to maintain in the field. In a typical American squad, the Thompson was carried by a non-commissioned officer or a soldier expected to lead an assault. Riflemen armed with M1 Garans provided long-range fire, while the Thompson covered the dangerous close-in work. In city fighting, its role became even more important. A soldier clearing a building needed a weapon that could fire rapidly without pausing to work a bolt or reload constantly. German infantry units faced a different situation. Most German soldiers carried the Kar 98K, a bolt-action rifle that was accurate and powerful at long range but slow to fire. A trained rifleman could get off 10 aimed shots per minute, but each shot required working the bolt by hand. In open country, this was less of a problem. In narrow streets and stairwells, it was a major disadvantage. The Germans did have their own submachine gun, the MP-40. It fired a smaller 9mm round and had a similar rate of fire to the Thompson. However, MP-40s were not as common. They were typically issued to squad leaders and a few chosen men, not spread widely across the unit. This meant that most German squads relied on a mix of rifles and a single automatic weapon, such as a light machine gun or one MP-40. The difference in firepower became clear during street fighting. When a German squad defended a building, they could fire accurately from windows and doorways, but they were limited in how many shots they could put downrange at once. The Americans, with several Thompsons in a single squad, could pour heavy fire into a room or hallway. The .45 caliber rounds were slower than rifle bullets, but their size and weight made them devastating at short distances. A single Thompson could change the course of a skirmish. In one recorded encounter during the Sicilian campaign, a U.S. soldier armed with a Thompson entered a building held by German riflemen. The Germans fired their first volley, But before they could work their bolts again, the Thompson unleashed a burst of 30 rounds. The fight was over in seconds. German soldiers, stunned by the volume of fire, either fell or fled. The sound of the Thompson was unique. It had a steady, deep rhythm that echoed in narrow streets and stone-walled rooms. Soldiers on both sides could identify it instantly. To Americans, it was a reassuring sound, a sign that their men were pushing forward. To the Germans, it was a warning of danger close at hand. The Thompson was not without drawbacks. Its weight made it tiring to carry, and its short range meant it was less useful in open terrain. The .45 ACP ammunition was also heavy, limiting how much a soldier could carry. Reloading under fire could be difficult, especially with the drum magazines. Even so, in the brutal environment of urban combat, its advantages far outweighed its limitations. As German forces encountered more American units armed with Thompsons, they began to take note of the weapon's impact. German reports described how U.S. assault teams would storm buildings with overwhelming close-range fire. Defenders often could not reload fast enough to respond. Some German soldiers tried to capture Thompsons and use them themselves, though ammunition supply was an issue. The contrast between the two armies' weapons reflected their different tactical philosophies. The Germans emphasized precision and disciplined marksmanship with rifles and machine guns. The Americans favored flexibility and volume of fire, using a mix of rifles, submachine guns, and automatic weapons to adapt to the fight at hand. By late 1942, as the fighting moved deeper into occupied territory, these differences played out on the battlefield. In cities like Palermo and Tunis, the Thompson gave U.S. troops a critical edge. It allowed them to move aggressively in tight quarters, where speed and overwhelming fire could decide the outcome in seconds. German squads, armed mostly with bolt-action rifles, found themselves at a disadvantage they could not easily overcome. The Thompson became a symbol of American firepower in these battles. Its presence shaped the way U.S. squads fought and forced German commanders to rethink how they equipped and organized their men for close-quarters combat. In every ruined street and shattered building, the steady rhythm of its fire told the story of a new kind of war. The morning light was pale and weak, barely breaking through the smoke that hung over the ruined city. Broken buildings leaned at odd angles, their walls scorched and their windows blown out. Rubble filled the streets. Shattered carts and burnt-out cars blocked the alleys. In the distance, the sound of sporadic rifle fire echoed like distant hammer blows. German soldiers moved quickly, setting up a barricade at a narrow intersection that cut through the heart of the district. They dragged doors, bricks, and splintered beams into place, stacking them waist-high. A crew manned an MG-42 machine gun, placing it on a makeshift tripod behind the barricade. The weapon's belt of ammunition hung ready, its end resting in a box beside the gunner. Two riflemen knelt nearby, watching the approaches with their Kar 98 KS ready. A handful of civilians ran past, clutching what little they could carry. A mother guided her two children into a side alley, glancing back at the soldiers with a mix of fear and relief. The streets emptied quickly. The city was now a battlefield. Down the road, a squad of American infantry advanced carefully. They moved in short bounds, crouched low, rifles ready. Their boots crunched on broken glass. Each man scanned windows and doorways, expecting fire at any moment. The squad leader, Sergeant Miller, kept to the center of the formation. His eyes swept the rooftops as he directed his men forward with quick hand signals. Two of his men carried Thompson submachine guns. The rest were armed with M1 Garands and a Browning automatic rifle. The first shots came without warning. A sharp crack from an upper window. A U.S. rifleman spun and dropped, his helmet clattering to the ground. A second later, the MG-42 opened up. Its roar filled the narrow street, a rapid, chattering scream. Bullets tore through the air, striking walls and throwing up clouds of dust and stone chips. The squad dove for cover, pressing themselves against the ruined facades of buildings. Pinned down, they returned fire in short bursts, but the MG-42's field of fire was too wide. Anyone who moved into the open risked being cut in half. The gunner adjusted his aim, walking fire across the street. Miller shouted over the noise, his voice barely carrying above the machine gun's relentless rhythm. He signaled to the two Thompson gunners, pointing toward a narrow side alley that led around the flank of the barricade. The two men nodded. They rose from cover and sprinted across a doorway, disappearing into the alley's shadows. The rest of the squad increased their fire, aiming at the windows and upper floors to distract the Germans. Bullets smashed into wooden shutters and plaster walls, keeping the defenders' heads down. The alley was dark and cluttered. The two Thompson gunners moved quickly, stepping over broken furniture and rubble. Their weapons were heavy, but they kept their grips firm. Each man carried several loaded stick magazines in pouches strapped to his chest. They could hear the MG-42 firing on the street, its deep roar shaking the walls around them. They reached a door at the rear of a building that overlooked the barricade. One man tried the handle. Locked. He kicked it hard, splintering the frame. The door swung open into a narrow hall. They entered low and fast, muzzles up. A German soldier appeared at the far end, his rifle halfway to his shoulder. The first burst from a Thompson struck him before he could fire. The heavy .45 caliber rounds dropped him instantly. Moving room to room, they advanced toward the front of the building. The confined space amplified the sound of their weapons. Each short, controlled burst echoed like thunder. A German squad upstairs scrambled to form a defense. They had rifles and a single MP-40. It was not enough. The Thompsons unleashed a storm of bullets as the Americans stormed up the stairwell. German shouts were drowned out by the relentless beat of automatic fire. On the street, the squad heard the change. The MG-42 faltered, its fire broken by bursts of shooting from inside the building. Miller seized the moment. He waved his men forward. They rose from cover and surged toward the barricade, firing as they moved. A grenade landed behind the sandbags, exploding in a spray of smoke and debris. The MG-42 crew fell silent. At close range, the Americans overwhelmed the defenders. The remaining Germans tried to fall back, but they were caught in the open. Rifle fire cut them down. Within minutes, the intersection was secure. Miller's men moved quickly, checking bodies and searching for stragglers. Inside the building, the two Thompson gunners reloaded. Their weapons smoked from constant use. Spent casings littered the floor, glinting in the dim light. They stepped carefully over the fallen, clearing each room to be sure no Germans remained. Outside, Miller surveyed the scene. The barricade was torn apart. Blood streaked the stones. Civilians began to emerge from hiding, stepping cautiously into the open. They kept their distance from the soldiers, their faces pale and drawn. The men gathered, breathing heavily. The two Thompson gunners emerged from the building, their uniforms torn and blackened with soot. One of them handed Miller a captured MP-40, shaking his head at its light weight compared to his own weapon. Miller gave a simple order. They would hold the position until reinforcements arrived. His men spread out, setting up defensive positions with practiced efficiency. As dusk settled, the sounds of battle faded. The Americans had taken the street. The German defenders had been forced to retreat. The fight had shown the value of automatic fire in the close, brutal terrain of the city. The Thompson's steady, punishing bursts had broken the enemy line and opened the way forward. The street was quiet for the first time in hours. Smoke still hung in the air, drifting between the ruined buildings. The smell of burnt powder and plaster filled every breath. The Americans moved slowly, checking doorways and alleys as they secured the area. Their shoulders sagged under the weight of their gear, but their eyes stayed sharp. The fight had been close and violent. Everyone knew more Germans might be nearby. Two men with Thompsons sat on the edge of a broken fountain. Their uniforms were streaked with dirt, their hands black with soot. They wiped the sweat from their faces, still catching their breath. One of them, Private Dawson, reloaded a fresh stick magazine and slid it into place with a sharp click. He gave a short laugh, shaking his head. "This thing chews through kraut lines like a buzz saw," he said, holding up the weapon. His voice was tired but steady. Corporal Hayes, sitting beside him, nodded. "We'd still be pinned down if we didn't have these," he replied. They didn't know what hit them. Nearby, Sergeant Miller walked among his men, checking on each one. He stopped at a doorway where two riflemen were dragging away the body of a German machine gunner. Miller glanced at the MG-42 lying next to the dead soldier. "Hell of a weapon," he said quietly, then turned his attention back to his squad. "Make sure we hold this spot. We're not giving it back." The men trusted their Thompsons in a way that went beyond equipment. In the tight streets and cramped rooms, the weapon had been their lifeline. Its deep, steady bursts gave them confidence to move forward. When the MG-42 opened up, they had felt the fear of being pinned down, unable to move. When the Thompsons fired back, that fear turned to action. Private Dawson looked at his empty magazines scattered on the ground. "We burned through ammo fast," he said, almost to himself. "Worth it, though." Hayes gave a small smile. "I'd carry twice the weight if it means clearing a building like that." He paused, then added, "Those Germans weren't ready for it. Not even close." Inside a nearby house, the scene was very different. German survivors sat in the corner of a ruined room, their hands behind their heads. They had been captured when the Americans stormed the barricade. Their faces were pale, their uniforms stained with dust and blood. They spoke in low voices, glancing nervously at their captors. One young German soldier stared at a Thompson leaning against the wall. His eyes were wide, a mix of anger and disbelief. He muttered to the man beside him, calling it Das Amerikanische Fleischwolf, the American meat grinder. The name spread quietly among the prisoners, passed from one to another. The German squad leader, a sergeant with a bandaged arm, sat apart from his men. His expression was hard, but he could not hide the unease in his voice. "We were holding them," he said to no one in particular. "Then they came through the side, those guns spraying everywhere. There was no time to reload, no way to fight back." Some of the Germans had seen Thompsons before, taken from dead or captured American soldiers. A few had even used them in earlier battles, though ammunition was always a problem. Now, seeing them used in numbers, they understood the full danger. One prisoner shifted, eyeing a fallen American nearby. His hand twitched as if he wanted to grab the Thompson lying beside the body. An American guard noticed the movement and raised his rifle. The German froze, then slowly lowered his eyes. Outside, civilians emerged from hiding. They moved cautiously, stepping over rubble and avoiding the soldiers. Many carried small bundles, blankets, food, a few possessions salvaged from their homes. Their faces showed the strain of living through bombardments and street fighting. A woman with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders guided a small boy through the wreckage. His hands were pressed tightly over his ears. The roar of automatic fire still echoed in his memory. Even though the guns were silent now, he kept them covered, flinching at every sharp sound. The woman paused at the edge of the street, looking at the American soldiers. Her expression was a mixture of fear and hope. She said nothing, only nodded when Miller gestured for her to pass. She hurried across the open ground, pulling the boy along behind her. The sound of the Thompson had terrified many in the neighborhood. Its deep, rolling bursts were unlike the sharper crack of rifles. To the civilians, it was the sound of chaos and destruction. Walls rattled and windows shattered as it echoed through the streets. Children hid in basements, hands over their ears, while parents tried to calm them. For the soldiers, the sound carried a different meaning. To the Americans, it was the voice of survival and dominance in close combat. To the Germans, it was a sound they dreaded. It marked the moment when their defensive line would break under relentless fire. As dusk settled, the contrast between the two sides became clear. The Americans moved with purpose, reinforcing their position and checking weapons. The Germans sat in silence, their morale shaken. The civilians moved quietly among them, avoiding eye contact, gathering what little they could before retreating to safer parts of the city. Private Dawson leaned against the fountain again, looking at the darkened street. "They'll remember today," he said, his voice low. "Every time they hear one of these guns, they'll think twice." Hayes nodded, loading another magazine with steady hands. "Let them," he said. "It means we get through the next fight alive." The night grew colder, but the memory of the day's battle stayed vivid. The image of the Thompsons in action, the rapid bursts, the shattered barricade, the stunned prisoners, remained in the minds of everyone who had been there, soldiers and civilians alike. The fight for the street ended, but its effect carried far beyond the rubble where it took place. When the gunfire stopped and the smoke cleared, the Americans held the position. Their success was not just the result of courage or numbers. It was shaped by the weapons they carried, especially the Thompson submachine gun. The brutal exchange had shown both armies how close-quarters fighting had changed in modern war. German commanders received reports of the battle within hours. Officers listened as surviving soldiers described the sudden and overwhelming bursts of fire. They spoke of rooms cleared in seconds and positions lost before anyone could reload. Many reports used the same phrase: "The Americans came in with meat grinders." It was not a figure of speech. The heavy .45 caliber rounds cut through doorways, furniture, and men with terrifying speed. For the German army, these accounts raised alarms. Their standard infantry weapon, the Kar 98K rifle, was accurate and deadly at long distances. But in narrow streets and inside buildings, its slow rate of fire was a serious weakness. A rifleman could fire a single round, work the bolt, and fire again, but the time between shots left him vulnerable. Against an opponent with a weapon like the Thompson, those seconds meant defeat. The MG42 was meant to balance this problem. It was a powerful machine gun with an unmatched rate of fire. But it was heavy, difficult to move, and needed a crew to operate it. In urban fighting, where positions changed constantly, a single MG42 could not cover every angle. German squads often found themselves stretched too thin. When the Americans attacked from multiple directions, the machine gun crew could not respond fast enough. These lessons forced German planners to rethink their approach. They began to study ways to give ordinary riflemen more firepower without relying on large, crew-served weapons. Some officers argued for greater production of the MP40 submachine gun. It was lighter than the Thompson and used 9mm ammunition, which was easier to produce. But there were problems. The MP40 had a lower stopping power and shorter effective range. It was useful in close quarters, but it could not replace the rifle entirely. This debate led to a new idea: a weapon that combined the rapid fire of a submachine gun with the range and power of a rifle. Designers experimented with intermediate cartridges, lighter than the standard rifle round but stronger than pistol ammunition. The result would eventually become the Sturmgewehr 44 or STG 44, the first true assault rifle. The early stages of this project were driven by urgent reports from the front. German units were facing increasing numbers of Allied troops in urban areas, from the ruins of Russian cities to the streets of Sicily and Italy. The need was clear: more automatic weapons in the hands of every soldier. In the months following the American assault on that narrow street, German squads began to reorganize. The old model of one machine gun supported by riflemen was no longer enough. They added more MP40s where they could and placed a stronger emphasis on flexible, mobile firepower. Some squads trained specifically for room clearing, using grenades and close-range weapons to counter the Americans. The change was slow and uneven. Germany's industrial base was already strained by the demands of a global war. Producing enough MP40s, let alone a new weapon like the STG-44, was a massive challenge. Many units never received the new guns, relying instead on captured Allied weapons or improvisation. Still, the shift in thinking was significant. On the American side, the battle confirmed lessons that commanders had already suspected. The Thompson was not just a support weapon. It was essential for leading assaults in urban terrain. U.S. doctrine began to reflect this reality. Squad leaders and select riflemen were equipped with Thompsons whenever possible. Engineers and paratroopers, often tasked with dangerous close-in work, were given priority. In training camps back in the United States, instructors used examples from Sicily and North Africa to teach new recruits. They explained how the Thompson allowed a squad to move through a building quickly, suppressing defenders with heavy bursts of fire. They stressed teamwork, with riflemen covering longer distances while the Thompson gunners handled the tight spaces. This approach shaped how American units fought as they moved deeper into occupied Europe. When they reached cities like Aachen and later the streets of Normandy and beyond, they were prepared. The mix of rifles, automatic rifles, and submachine guns gave them a balance of range and close-range power. German intelligence noticed these changes. Intercepted reports and captured documents described American squads built around flexibility. German officers warned their men to expect fast, aggressive attacks in built-up areas. They advised more defensive depth, with fallback positions ready when the first line was breached. The psychological impact was just as important as the tactical one. German soldiers who had faced the Thompson often spoke of the fear it inspired. The weapon's sound was distinct, a deep, rolling rhythm unlike the sharper crack of rifles. When they heard it echoing through a ruined street, they knew what was coming. Some panicked, abandoning positions before the Americans even reached them. This fear affected planning at higher levels. German commanders began to allocate more resources to urban defenses, pulling machine guns and submachine guns from quieter sectors. They understood that if a street fight broke out, they needed overwhelming firepower to hold their ground. The American command also took notes. After-action reports highlighted the importance of coordination between squads, especially when multiple teams armed with Thompsons attacked together. They recommended carrying extra ammunition and organizing resupply routes through the city. They also emphasized the need for clear communication, as the roar of automatic fire often drowned out shouted orders. As the war progressed, both sides adapted. The battle over that single street became part of a larger pattern. Each engagement taught new lessons. The Americans refined their doctrine, while the Germans searched for ways to counter it. The Thompson was at the center of this contest, a weapon that shaped how men fought and how armies planned their strategies. In the months after the fight, German factories worked to increase production of automatic weapons. The STG-44 entered limited service, too late to change the course of the war but early enough to show what the future of infantry combat would look like. American forces, meanwhile, continued to rely on the Thompson, its role secure in their tactics and training. What began as a single clash in a ruined city had a ripple effect across entire fronts. The lessons learned in those narrow streets spread to generals and planners far from the battlefield. Every burst of fire from a Thompson carried not only bullets but also a message. The shape of modern war was changing, and both sides had to keep up or be left behind. The Thompson submachine gun did more than help win a single fight on a ruined street. Its presence shaped the way soldiers thought about combat and how armies prepared for future wars. In the months and years that followed, the Thompson became more than just a weapon. It became a symbol of American industrial strength and the ability to adapt to the brutal demands of modern warfare. As the war continued, stories about the Thompson spread among Allied troops and enemy soldiers alike. To American infantrymen, the weapon was a trusted companion. They gave it nicknames like Tommy Gun or simply the Thompson. It was not a light weapon, and it could be awkward to carry, but in the chaos of a close fight it never failed them. Its deep, steady bursts of fire gave soldiers a sense of confidence. They knew that when they stepped into a dark hallway or stormed a barricade, the Thompson would deliver. German soldiers came to view it with a mix of respect and dread. Prisoners often spoke about their first encounters with it. Many had faced American rifle fire before and knew how to counter it with discipline and cover. But when a squad armed with Thompsons moved in, the fight felt different. The volume of fire was overwhelming. Rooms that would have taken minutes to clear with rifles were swept in seconds. Germans called it Das Amerikanische Fleischwolf, the American meat grinder. The name was passed quietly among units, carried on whispers and reports. This reaction had a lasting effect on German weapon design. As engineers and planners studied the reports, they saw the need to equip every soldier with automatic or rapid-fire weapons. The Thompson demonstrated what was possible when an infantry squad carried concentrated firepower. While Germany struggled to meet production demands, the lesson stuck. The creation of the STG-44 assault rifle drew on those early encounters. It combined range and rapid fire in a single weapon, shaping the future of infantry arms for decades to come. For the Americans, the Thompson became a visual and auditory mark of their advance. War correspondents photographed paratroopers and squad leaders carrying it during operations in Europe and the Pacific. Newsreels captured its sound, a low, rolling rhythm that echoed through city streets and jungle trails alike. Families back home saw these images and understood that this heavy, reliable weapon was part of what gave their sons a fighting chance. In battles across Europe, the Thompsons' role expanded. In places like Aachen, St. Lo, and the hedgerows of Normandy, it proved its worth again and again. Urban combat was no longer rare. It became a central feature of the war. Soldiers needed weapons suited to that environment. Rifles remained essential for open ground, but inside buildings and alleys, the Thompson was unmatched. Its presence shaped tactics. Units planned assaults around its firepower, pairing it with grenades and automatic rifles to clear resistance quickly and decisively. As the war moved toward its end, the Thompson became part of the American image of victory. It represented not only firepower but also mass production. Thousands were built in factories across the United States, shipped overseas, and handed to soldiers heading into combat. This industrial effort showed the scale of American involvement in the war. The sight of so many Thompsons in the field was proof of a nation's capacity to equip its forces for modern battle. When peace finally came, the Thompson story did not end. Many were brought home as souvenirs or kept in armories for future use. Others were sent to allies around the world, seeing service in conflicts long after the Second World War ended. In some places, it became a weapon of revolution and resistance, carried by fighters far removed from the original battlefields of Europe. Veterans remembered it in vivid detail. Decades later, they described the sound of its fire as clearly as if they had heard it yesterday. In interviews and memoirs, they spoke about the feeling of holding one during a fight, the weight in their hands, the solid kick of each burst. Some recalled the way it steadied their nerves when charging into danger. Others spoke of how it changed the way they viewed combat, turning chaotic skirmishes into battles they could control. Civilians who lived through the war also remembered it. For many, the sound of the Thompson was the sound of liberation and terror combined. In occupied cities, they hid in basements as the firefights raged above. The distinctive rhythm of the weapon meant that American forces were close, but it also meant destruction was near. Walls shook, windows shattered. The noise drowned out voices and left ears ringing long after the fight was done. In museums and collections, the Thompson became a physical link to the past. Visitors could see its solid wood stock, its heavy steel receiver, and understand what it meant to the soldiers who carried it. The weapon's simple, durable design told a story of a time when survival depended on quick action and overwhelming force. The legacy of the Thompson reached beyond history books. Modern militaries studied its role in World War II when developing new weapons and tactics. The idea of giving every soldier a rapid-fire weapon grew from lessons learned in battles where the Thompson had been decisive. Today's rifles and carbines trace part of their lineage back to those early encounters in ruined streets and shattered towns. For those who were there, the Thompson remained more than a piece of equipment. It was part of their lives during the most intense moments of the war. When they spoke of it years later, their words carried a mix of pride and sorrow. They remembered comrades lost and victories won, all tied to the distinctive shape and sound of the gun. In reunions and interviews, veterans sometimes imitated the rhythm of its fire, tapping their hands on tables to show younger listeners how it sounded. The pattern was unmistakable, even decades removed from the battlefield. In their memories, it was the heartbeat of a squad pushing forward, step by step, through smoke and rubble. The ruined street where those first lessons were learned changed over time. The barricades were cleared, the buildings rebuilt, and life returned to the neighborhood. But beneath the new walls and paved roads, the echoes of that day remained. The Thompson had left its mark not just on the soldiers who carried it, but on the very nature of modern warfare. It showed how a single weapon, placed in the hands of determined men, could shape the course of a battle and influence the designs of armies for generations.